The human walked slowly into the alien colony, his boots heavy from the long journey, his shoulders tense under the weight of silence that was not truly silent. For everywhere he went the sound of alien voices followed, not with welcome but with laughter and whispers, sharp and cruel, cutting into him like invisible blades. They looked at his pale, fragile skin, his weak-looking arms, his short frame compared to their tall, strong bodies, and they mocked, their strange mouths twisting into smirks, their eyes glowing with humor that was never kind. And though he tried to keep his head high, though he pretended not to care, deep inside his chest the fire of anger and shame burned hot, each laugh pressing down on him heavier than the last. He clenched his fists but said nothing, because what could one human say to a whole colony of creatures that believed he was nothing, a mistake, a joke of nature? And yet the sting of their words echoed louder in his mind than any weapon could. He sat that night in the corner of the small shelter given to him, the walls cold, the air filled with distant sounds of alien feasts and gatherings where more laughter rose, no doubt at his expense, and he could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes he saw their smirks, their shaking heads, their mocking words repeating over and over until the silence felt unbearable. So he stood up, his chest tight, and walked out into the night. The stars above sharp like icy daggers, the moons casting long shadows over the sand that stretched endless beyond the colony, and without thinking he wandered toward it, toward the place no one went, the desert of forgotten things. His steps sank into the shifting ground, the wind whispering against his ears like old ghosts, but he did not turn back. He wanted distance, distance from their laughter, from their disbelief, from the weight of being seen as nothing, and as he walked farther the lights of the colony faded, leaving him in darkness lit only by the pale glow of the sky, each step louder in his head than the mocking voices he had escaped, yet strangely calmer too. Like the desert swallowed his shame and left behind only determination, though he did not yet know for what. Hours passed, or maybe just moments. Time slipped strange in the quiet, until his foot struck something hard beneath the sand. He stumbled forward, hands scraping against cold metal that should not have been there, and when he brushed the sand away, his heart pounded, for there, rising from the ground like the bones of a giant, lay the broken hull of a forgotten spaceship, its side scarred, half buried as if the desert itself had tried to swallow it, but its shape still carried the shadow of power, a reminder of a time when it had ruled the skies. He stood frozen, breath caught, because stories whispered in every starport told of such wrecks, ancient ships that had fallen in wars older than memory, ships that sometimes held treasures or curses, and as the moonlight touched the hull, faint lines of symbols glowed weakly, alive though broken, as if waiting, calling, whispering not with cruelty but with something else, something deeper, something that reached through the fire of his anger and touched the quiet of his soul. He stepped closer, brushing his hand across the cracked surface, feeling a hum under his fingers, soft but real, and for the first time since entering the alien colony, he felt the laughter behind him fade, replaced by the strange pull of mystery, by the sense that perhaps he was not meant to be nothing after all, that maybe fate had led him into the desert for this reason, to find what others had forgotten, to awaken what others could not. The wind howled around him, carrying sand across the wreck, but he did not move away. He pressed his palm against the glowing lines and felt a shiver crawl through his body, the hook tightening around him. For somewhere inside the wreck something stirred, something that had waited long, too long, for a human touch. The night was still when the human stood before the half-buried spaceship, his breath clouding in the cold desert air, his hand pressed to the broken hull that hummed faintly beneath. His touch, and though fear whispered that he should leave, curiosity pulled him forward stronger than caution. So he stepped through the jagged opening where sand had eaten away at the wall, and entered the forgotten ship. Inside the air was heavy with dust, each step stirring it into clouds that glittered faintly under the dim glow of alien symbols carved into the walls. Strange letters that seemed to shift when his eyes lingered too long, as if alive. His footsteps echoed in the silence, louder than he expected, like the ship was empty but listening. Each sound swallowed then returned to him, making him feel as though unseen eyes watched from the shadows. He moved slowly, touching the walls, feeling the hum grow stronger, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the metal. And though the corridors were cracked and broken, something inside remained awake, like the ship itself was not truly dead, just sleeping. As he walked deeper, the air grew warmer, heavy with a faint metallic taste that clung to his tongue, and he wondered how long this wreck had been buried here, How many centuries had passed since it had last flown among the stars? And yet here it was, still alive in some strange way. He thought about the aliens back in the colony, their laughter, their words about how humans were weak, unworthy of real power, and for a moment his chest ached with the same shame. But the glowing halls pushed back against that feeling, whispering to him without words, promising there was something here for him if only he dared to reach for it. He tightened his fists and pressed on, deeper into the ship. The passage narrowed, twisting like a maze, until at last he entered a vast chamber that opened before him like the inside of a cathedral. Its ceiling cracked but still towering above, and in the center stood a pedestal of black stone that seemed untouched by time, and resting upon it was a suit of armor unlike anything he had ever seen. The plates were dark, almost like shadow solidified, sharp lines etched with the same glowing runes that lined the walls, and though it looked heavy, there was something sleek, alive, dangerous about it, as if it had been waiting. He froze at the edge of the chamber, his breath caught in his throat, because he had heard stories of such relics, artifacts of ancient wars that no one could claim, weapons too powerful, armor too proud, and he knew others had likely tried to touch it before, perhaps even the very aliens who mocked him, yet none had succeeded, the proof being that it still sat there, waiting. He stepped forward, his heart pounding louder with each step, his mind whispering that he was a fool, that he was weak, that he would be thrown aside just like the others, yet another failure to add to the laughter. But his body moved as though pulled by invisible strings, his eyes locked on the armor that glowed brighter with each inch closer. The runes pulsed faintly as if in rhythm with his heartbeat, and he felt a chill race through his veins, both fear and anticipation mixing into one. He reached the pedestal and stood before it, staring at the armor, at the helmet shaped like the head of some forgotten beast, at the chest plate carved with symbols he could not read, and though the air was heavy and sharp, he raised his hand. His fingers trembled as they hovered just above the cold surface of the gauntlet, and memories of the colony's laughter struck him again, their words echoing, fragile, weak, short-lived, unworthy. His jaw tightened, his anger rising, and in that anger, he pushed his hand down, letting his skin touch the armor. For a moment nothing happened, just silence, but then a shock raced up his arm, making him stumble back, his heart leaping, his body shivering with the force of it, and the armor pulsed with light, faint but growing. He gasped, staring, and the chamber itself seemed to breathe, the walls vibrating softly, the runes flaring brighter. The armor lifted itself from the pedestal, piece by piece, as though alive, hovering in the air before him, and the hum he had felt since entering the ship grew louder, deeper, like drums of war echoing through the chamber. He wanted to run, yet his feet did not move, his body frozen as the pieces of armor turned in the air, glowing with power, waiting. The ship groaned around him, the ancient hull trembling with energy, sand shifting as if the entire desert knew something had awakened. The human stood at the center, staring wide-eyed, his chest rising and falling in quick gasps, knowing he had found something greater than himself, something dangerous, something that would change everything. And yet, though fear gripped him, another feeling rose stronger, hope, fierce and unstoppable, the hope that maybe, just maybe, he was not the weak thing they believed him to be. The chamber shook as the armor floated in the air, glowing brighter with each second, the hum deepening into a thunderous beat that echoed through the ship like the heart of some ancient beast awakening after endless sleep, and the human stood frozen, his body trembling, his eyes wide with shock, because the armor was not falling to the ground like lifeless metal. It was alive, moving as though it had a will of its own, and that will had chosen him. He stumbled back, pressing his hand against the cold wall of the chamber, his breath quick and shallow, fear crashing over him in waves, but at the same time something stronger burned in his chest, a strange pull, as though invisible chains linked him to the floating pieces, as if they had been waiting for him alone. The runes along the walls flared like fire, bathing the room in light, and he could feel the air grow hot, heavy, each breath filling him with sparks that made his heart pound faster. With a sudden jolt, the gauntlet shot forward and clamped around his arm, wrapping his flesh in dark metal before he could resist, the cold touch burning into his skin like ice and flame together, and he cried out, stumbling, trying to pull free, but the armor tightened, sealing itself against him, becoming part of him, and before he could understand, the second gauntlet slammed onto his other arm, followed by the boots that rose and locked onto his legs. their weight heavy yet strangely light. As if the armor carried itself. The chest plate hovered before him for only a heartbeat, then slammed into his chest, the shock of it driving the air from his lungs, forcing him to his knees, his vision blurring with sparks of light. He gasped, clawing at the metal, but instead of crushing him, it shifted, reshaping to fit his form, the runes glowing as though pleased. The helmet descended last, floating slowly until it slid over his head, and in an instant his world changed. The inside of the helmet lit with symbols he did not understand, lines of alien text and shifting diagrams glowing across his vision. And then, without warning, a voice filled his mind, not spoken, not heard, but felt, deep and commanding, a voice that carried the weight of centuries. It did not speak in words he knew, yet somehow he understood, its message clear, chosen. His body stiffened, his heart hammering as the word echoed through him. The runes inside the chamber pulsing with the same rhythm as the voice. The armor sealed completely, and suddenly power rushed through him, filling every nerve, every muscle. His body no longer heavy and tired but alive, strong, sharp, as though he had been asleep his whole life and only now awakened. The ship itself seemed to roar in approval, the walls trembling as energy surged through old circuits, long dead lights flickering awake, and outside, the desert shook, a pillar of light bursting into the sky like a signal flare announcing the return of something long forgotten. In the colony miles away, aliens stopped in their tracks, turning their heads toward the desert, their mocking laughter dying in their throats as the light burned against the night. Groups of them rushed toward the dunes, their voices filled with panic and fear, for they knew the legends, they knew what kind of power lay in the ruins, and if it had awakened, then something beyond their control had begun. Inside the chamber, the human staggered to his feet, his hands clenched, the armor humming with each movement, guiding him, balancing him, making him stronger. He raised his arm, and without thinking, a shield of light flared into existence, shimmering in front of him like solid energy, then vanished when he lowered it, leaving him stunned but breathless with wonder. His anger, his shame, the laughter of the aliens, all of it felt far away, drowned out by the fire running through his veins. He had been mocked, humiliated, treated as weak, but here, in this forgotten place, he was something else, something new, something dangerous. Yet even as he stood taller, feeling the strength of the armor surround him, fear lingered, because he could sense it was not just a gift but a burden, not just power but a promise, and the voice inside the helmet whispered again, softer this time, almost like a warning, tested. His chest tightened, his fists clenched, because he knew whatever this armor was, whatever it had chosen him for, it would not be easy, it would not be kind. Still, as the ground trembled and the footsteps of aliens echoed outside, drawing closer to the ship, the human felt the fire inside burn brighter. For the first time in his life, he was not the weak one, not the joke in the crowd, but the center, the chosen, the beginning of something greater, and though he did not yet know if he could control it, one truth cut clear through the fear. When they came, when they saw him, the laughter would end. The sound of rushing footsteps and alien voices carried through the cracked hull of the ancient ship as the human stood in the center of the glowing chamber, his chest heaving under the weight of the armor that had now sealed itself to his body, his mind still reeling from the strange voice that had whispered chosen and tested, words that burned in his skull like fire. And though he felt stronger than ever before, though his arms no longer shook with weakness, a deeper fear crawled into his heart, for he did not understand what had truly happened, nor what the armor wanted from him. The walls trembled again as more energy flowed through the old ship, long-dead machines sparking back to life, and outside, the sandstorm kicked into a frenzy, glowing faintly as if even the desert itself knew that something powerful had awakened. Then the shadows moved at the edge of the chamber, and alien figures poured inside, their tall frames lit by the glow of the runes, their weapons raised, their eyes wide with disbelief. For a heartbeat the chamber was silent, the aliens frozen in place, their mouths parted as they stared at the human they had mocked only hours ago, the weak outsider they had called fragile and useless, and now before them he stood wrapped in armor that pulsed with power, his body outlined by streams of light. They whispered in their strange guttural language, their voices heavy with fear, some calling him cursed, others warning he should be destroyed before the armor consumed them all. One alien stepped forward, braver than the rest, raising a blade that hissed with blue energy, and pointed it at him, shouting words that carried the weight of hatred and command. But even without knowing the language the human understood, they saw him as a threat, an abomination, and they would not allow him to leave alive. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath quick behind the mask of the helmet, and for a moment fear took hold of him, choking him, because he did not know how to fight. He did not know what this armor would truly do, and what if it failed him? What if the aliens were right? What if he was nothing more than a weak human pretending to be something greater? The mocking laughter of the colony echoed again in his mind, and he almost lowered his gaze. But then the armor pulsed against his skin, the voice whispering stand. Heat spread across his limbs, his body steadied, and when the alien warrior lunged forward, the human's rose before he even thought. A shield of glowing energy bursting into existence with a crackling roar, stopping the blade in mid-swing. Sparks rained across the chamber, the warrior's weapon sliding off the barrier, and gasps filled the air. The aliens stepped back, their eyes widening, their fear breaking through their anger. The human stared at the shield shimmering in front of him, unable to believe it had come from his own movement, and slowly lowered his arm, the shield fading like mist. Silence stretched for a long moment, then broken whispers spread through the group. Fear, raw and sharp, replaced their mockery, their laughter crushed beneath the weight of the sight before them. The same human they had ridiculed now stood taller than them, stronger than them, cloaked in power they had never dared to claim. Some began to back away, their weapons lowering, their faces pale with disbelief, but others gritted their teeth, unwilling to accept what they saw, demanding that he be struck down before he became unstoppable. The human did not speak, he could not, for words failed him, his throat dry, his mind spinning, but his stance changed. He no longer bowed under the weight of shame, no longer hunched from the weight of their laughter. He stood straight, his shoulders square, his gaze hard behind the mask of the helmet, and though fear still lived inside him, it was no longer the same fear of being weak, it was the fear of what he had become, and what he might yet do. The aliens saw this and felt their own fear sharpen, for it was not just the armor they faced, it was the change in the human himself, and that frightened them more than any weapon. The chamber trembled again, sand pouring from cracks in the ceiling, the ship groaning like a beast waking from endless sleep, and the armor whispered again, a voice only he could hear, "They will see." He clenched his fists, the glow of the runes running up his arms, and though his heart still pounded with uncertainty, he knew one thing with terrible clarity. The time of being laughed at was over. Whatever came next, he would no longer be their joke, no longer their shadow, for he had become the very thing they feared, and their fear was only beginning. The silence of the chamber did not last long, for the whispers of fear among the aliens quickly twisted into shouts of anger, and though many wanted to flee, their leaders would not allow it, their pride too heavy to accept that the armor had chosen a human and not them. Word spread through the colony like fire on dry grass, and soon the gathering swelled, dozens of aliens standing in the ruins outside, their eyes glowing in the night as they argued, some demanding the human be cast out, others insisting he be killed before the armor grew stronger. The human, still trapped in the armor that pulsed against his skin like a second heartbeat, could feel their hatred pressing in on him from all sides, and though he stood taller now, a knot of unease twisted in his chest. He knew what was coming. They would not let him walk free. At last the tallest of the aliens stepped forward, his body marked with scars, his shoulders covered in plates of bone armor, a warrior clearly respected and feared. He pointed a massive weapon toward the human, its blade glowing with hot plasma, and in a deep voice that echoed through the ruins, he declared a challenge. The crowd fell silent at his words, their faces grim, for this was no ordinary fight. It was the trial by combat of their people, the ritual that decided who was worthy and who was nothing. If the human lost, he would not just die, his body would be left to rot in the sand, proof that no human should ever have stood among them. If he somehow won, then the armor would be his by right, though none believed he could succeed. The human felt the weight of the challenge press down on him, fear rising sharp and cold, for he had never fought in such a way before, never faced a warrior whose entire life was blood and battle. His hands clenched as he remembered their laughter, the endless humiliation that had followed him since arriving, and deep inside, the fire of anger grew stronger. The armor responded to it, the runes glowing brighter, the hum deepening as though it too wanted this fight, as though it fed on his rage. The warrior stepped into the chamber's center, the crowd forming a ring around them, their eyes fixed on what would come, some eager, some afraid, all silent. The warrior attacked first, his blade swinging down with crushing force, the air hissing with heat as it fell, and the human barely had time to raise his arm. The shield of energy flared into existence again, catching the strike with a blast of sparks. The shock of impact rattled his bones, but the armor steadied him, holding him firm as though the ground itself rooted him in place. Gasps erupted from the crowd, their disbelief rising again. But the warrior only snarled and pressed harder, his weapon grinding against the shield. The human gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead inside the helmet, fear and power fighting inside him. Then, without thinking, he pushed forward, and the shield burst outward in a wave of light, throwing the warrior back across the chamber. The aliens cried out in shock, some stepping away in fear, others yelling for the fight to continue. The warrior climbed to his feet, his eyes burning with fury now, and charged again, faster, his strikes a blur of glowing light. The human's body moved with the armor, blocking, dodging, striking back with bursts of energy that sparked from his fists. Each blow he delivered shook the chamber, each defense he held only growing stronger as the armor taught him how to move, how to fight. He no longer felt like the weak man mocked in the colony. He felt like something else entirely, a vessel of ancient strength. But even with the armor guiding him, the fight was not easy. The warrior's strength was real, his attacks brutal, his rage unshakable. Several times the human was driven to his knees, his shield cracking under the force of the blows, and doubt stabbed through him, whispering that he could not win, that this was too much, that he was still only human. Yet in those moments, the laughter of the colony returned to his memory, sharp and cruel, and with each echo the anger rose again, fierce and unstoppable. He pushed himself up, every muscle burning, every breath a roar, and struck back harder. At last, with one final desperate swing, the warrior raised his blade high, intending to cleave him in two. But the armor flared brighter than ever, its runes blazing like fire, and the human's hand shot upward, catching the blade in his grip. Sparks exploded as energy clashed against energy, but the blade shattered in his hand, breaking into molten fragments that scattered across the chamber floor. The crowd gasped, silence falling so heavy it pressed like a weight, for they had never seen their strongest warrior defeated. The human stood panting, his chest rising and falling beneath the glowing armor, his fists clenched, his gaze steady. The warrior fell to his knees, beaten, his weapon destroyed, and though hatred still shone in his eyes, he could not rise again. The aliens looked at each other, their fear now mixed with awe, their whispers no longer mocking but reverent. The human, the one they had ridiculed and scorned, had faced their champion and won. He had proven himself not weak, not fragile, but something far greater. And though fear still lingered in their voices, one truth settled over them all. The armor had chosen, and nothing could change it. The days that followed the battle changed everything, though not in ways the human had expected, for while the aliens no longer mocked him openly, the silence that replaced their laughter was heavy with unease, a silence filled with whispers spoken behind his back, words of both fear and awe, as though they did not know whether to see him as savior or curse. The armor did not leave him, not once, it clung to him like a second skin, and though he tried to pry it away, his hands could not undo the runes. It pulsed against his flesh with every beat of his heart. Alive, always alive, and each morning when he woke, he felt different. Stronger. His body no longer ached as it once did, his muscles sharper, his reflexes quicker, and even his mind, once slow compared to the brilliance of the alien scholars, now seemed to catch meanings and patterns he never would have understood before. At first he tested it in secret, stepping out into the barren desert where the sands stretched endless and the skies were empty, his movements guided by the armor as though it knew what he wanted before he did. He would raise his hands, and light would spark into shields, blades of energy, or bursts of fire that scorched the sand into glass. He would leap, and his feet carried him farther than any human should go, the ground trembling when he landed. His senses grew sharper. He could hear the smallest footsteps across dunes, see the faint glow of heat where no one else could, feel the pull of storms brewing in the distance. Each day revealed something new. Each day made him less the man he once was, more something else, something not entirely human. But with the power came questions that gnawed at him. The armor spoke sometimes, not in full sentences but in single words or feelings, guiding his actions, warning him of danger, and though it saved him, it unsettled him, because he no longer knew where his will ended and the armor's will began. In quiet moments, when he stared at the glowing runes across his arms, he felt as if he were being shaped, changed, prepared for something greater that he could not yet see. It was no longer only his anger at the aliens' laughter that pushed him. It was the whisper of destiny, the voice of the armor reminding him that he had been chosen. The aliens watched from a distance, their fear never fading. Where once they had spat insults, now they stepped aside in silence when he walked through the colony, their eyes following him with unease. Parents pulled their children close, warriors tightened their grips on weapons, and yet none dared confront him after what had happened in the chamber. Still, he could feel their unease grow heavier, could feel their leaders whispering in secret meetings, and he knew they wondered if the armor had made him a danger greater than any enemy they had faced. He could not deny the truth in their fear, because at night when he looked into the reflection of his helmet, glowing with alien light, he sometimes wondered the same. One evening, under the blood-red sky of twin suns setting, he sat alone at the edge of the colony, the desert stretching out before him, and the armor pulsed faintly, whispering a single word, ready. He clenched his fists, the runes glowing brighter, and for the first time he understood that the change inside him was not slowing, it was accelerating. His humanity felt thinner each day, replaced with something else, something ancient, and though part of him feared it, another part welcomed it, because with each change, the memory of the laughter that had haunted him felt weaker, more distant, as though it belonged to someone else. Yet he knew it was not over, because power never went unnoticed, and the alien's fear was not the only danger rising in the desert. He could feel it now, like a shadow on the horizon, the faint pull of eyes beyond their world, watching, waiting. The armor had not simply awakened for him to survive mockery. It had awakened because something was coming, and it had chosen him not out of kindness, but out of necessity. And as the night fell, the stars bright and sharp above, the human sat in silence, his heart torn between fear and determination, knowing that he was no longer who he had been, no longer the fragile outsider. He was something new, something the galaxy itself would soon have to face. The night was deep and still when the human sat alone within the broken hull of the ancient ship, the stars above sharp as blades, the sand whispering softly outside, and for the first time since the armor had claimed him, he felt utterly alone, as though the whole colony had abandoned him. They no longer laughed, no longer mocked him openly, but the silence that surrounded him when he walked through their streets was heavier than insults. It was the silence of fear, of suspicion, of beings who wondered if he was still a man or something else entirely. The armor pulsed gently against his skin, its runes glowing in rhythm with his heart, and he could not shake the thought that he was changing in ways even he did not fully understand. He touched the black metal across his chest, feeling the faint hum travel through his body, and whispered into the darkness, "Why me?" The words had barely left his lips when the glow of the runes brightened, flooding the chamber with blue light, and the hum deepened into a steady thrum that seemed to echo in his bones. Then the voice returned, not faint as before, not in broken whispers, but clear, resonant, filling his mind as if it had always been there, waiting for him to finally ask. "You were mocked, you were underestimated, you were forgotten." The words struck deep, because they were true, because they carried the sting of every laugh, every insult he had endured since stepping into the colony. His chest tightened, his throat dry, and he asked, almost in anger, "Why choose someone like me? Why not one of them, the strong ones?" The chamber trembled faintly, dust sifting from the cracks in the ceiling as the armor's voice answered again. Colder, heavier. The strong do not need the armor. They already believe they are worthy. The armor was forged for the one who is doubted, the one cast aside, the one no one believes can rise. Only the underestimated can carry its burden, because only they understand the weight of fear and the fire of survival. His breath caught, his fists clenching as the truth struck him harder than any blade could. He had been chosen not in spite of his weakness but because of it, because the very thing they mocked him for was the reason he was worthy. Images flashed through his mind, ancient warriors not of his kind, their bodies cloaked in the same living armor, rising from the shadows of forgotten worlds, standing against enemies who had believed them powerless. He saw battlefields soaked in fire, skies filled with warships, and each warrior shining like a beacon of defiance. They were not kings, not champions born from privilege or power. They were the outcasts, the overlooked, the underestimated. And one by one, the armor had chosen them. He gasped, the visions fading, leaving him trembling, his heart racing with both fear and understanding. He whispered into the silence, It has always been this way. The armor pulsed once more, firm and final. You are the next. He closed his eyes, the weight of those words pressing on him like the desert sun, heavy and merciless. Yet in that weight was also something else, purpose. He was no longer simply a man mocked by aliens, no longer just a fragile outsider stumbling through their colony. He was part of something older, something larger, a legacy of those who had been overlooked until they became unstoppable. And though fear gripped him still, though doubt whispered that he was not ready, deep inside another voice rose stronger. The voice of the fire that had burned since the first moment of mockery. I will prove them wrong. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was silent again, the runes dim, the visions gone, but the truth remained carved into his soul. He stood slowly, his armor glowing faintly in the dark, and for the first time he no longer felt like he was wearing it. He felt as though it was part of him, fused not just to his body but to his very being. The aliens might still whisper, they might still fear, but it no longer mattered, because he finally understood why the armor had chosen him, why it had answered his touch. It was not only to give him power. It was to make him a symbol, a reminder that the ridiculed, the overlooked, and the weak could rise higher than any who had ever scorned them. And as he stepped out into the cold night, the stars burning bright above, the human knew one truth. The galaxy would remember him, not for his weakness, but for the fear he would soon inspire. The desert lay silent under the pale light of 2 moons when the storm arrived, not of wind or sand, but of fire streaking across the sky. The invaders came without warning, their warships breaking through the atmosphere like burning meteors, their engines shaking the colony to its foundations. The aliens screamed and scattered as explosions tore through the outskirts, their defenses crumbling before they could even rise. Panic spread like wildfire. The proud colony that once laughed at the human reduced to chaos and fear in moments. Towers fell, ships burst into flame, and the ground shook under the weight of weapons too powerful for them to resist. Their leaders shouted orders, but the cries were drowned out by terror. And amid that chaos, one figure stood at the edge of the colony, still and waiting, the ancient armor glowing brighter with each blast that shook the sky. The human's heart pounded as he watched the invaders descend, massive figures spilling from their ships, their weapons blazing, their voices echoing across the battlefield like thunder. For a moment doubt stabbed through him. These were not the ones who mocked him. These were enemies far greater, enemies who would crush not just him but the entire colony. Yet the armor pulsed against his skin, alive with a rhythm that was no longer foreign. Rise, the voice whispered, firm and commanding, and his fear gave way to resolve. He clenched his fists, the runes across his arms igniting, and stepped forward into the burning streets. The aliens of the colony saw him as he passed, their wide eyes filled with terror, but this time not of him. They huddled behind broken walls, their children crying, their warriors bleeding, their pride shattered. Yet when their eyes fell on the human cloaked in armor, some whispered his name, others fell silent, watching. The very one they had ridiculed now walked toward the fire while they hid in the shadows. He did not look back. He did not speak. His steps carried him straight to the battlefield, where the invaders roared in triumph. The first strike came suddenly, a massive invader raising a cannon the size of a man and firing a bolt of plasma straight toward him. The explosion lit the street, fire rushing forward like a wave. But the human raised his arm and the shield flared alive, larger than ever before, a wall of light that absorbed the blast and shattered it into sparks. Gasps rose from behind him, voices trembling in awe. The invaders hesitated, confused by the lone figure still standing amid their weapons. Then he moved, faster than their eyes could follow, the armor carrying him like lightning. His fist struck the ground, and a shockwave burst outward, hurling the invaders from their feet, their weapons clattering uselessly across the stone. The battle raged through the night. Blades of light flared from his hands, cutting through machines that had crushed whole armies. His shield grew and shifted, a wall, a dome, a weapon that blasted back their fire with force greater than they could withstand. For every strike they delivered, the armor answered stronger. For every enemy that rose, he met them with fury born of years of humiliation. Every laugh he had endured now turned into fuel. The colony behind him saw it all, their fear giving way to something else, hope, sharp and blinding, hope born from the very one they had once mocked. The invaders, fierce and merciless, began to falter, their roars turning to cries of disbelief. They had expected an easy conquest, they had expected prey, but instead they found themselves facing something they could not comprehend. A human wrapped in power that belonged to an age before their memory. One of their commanders shouted for retreat, his voice breaking with fear, but it was too late. With a final surge, the human leapt high, higher than any man should, the sky blazing behind him, and brought both fists down upon the invader's largest war machine. The impact shook the desert, fire bursting outward in a pillar that lit the night like dawn. When the smoke cleared, the machine lay broken, its core shattered, and the invaders scattered in terror, their ships fleeing into the black sky, leaving behind only wreckage and silence. The human stood at the center of the battlefield, his armor glowing, his breath heavy, his body burning with exhaustion but unbroken. Slowly, he turned back toward the colony. The aliens who once laughed now stood in silence, their eyes wide, their bodies trembling. Some fell to their knees, others bowed their heads, not from command, but from something deeper. Fear, respect, awe. They no longer saw the fragile outsider. They saw the chosen, the one the armor had awakened, the one who had risen from ridicule to legend. The human looked at them, his face hidden behind the glowing helmet, his voice silent, for no words were needed. The message was already carved into the night, written in fire and fear. The laughter had ended. The galaxy would remember this night, not as the fall of a colony, but as the rise of a human who had been mocked, underestimated, and forgotten, until the ancient armor answered his touch and made him fearsome. And as the armor whispered one last word into his mind, begin, he knew this was not the end but the start of something far greater, a story that would spread across the stars.